Imagine standing at the edge of an endless jungle. Behind you are mountains. Ahead of you, a wall of trees stretches farther than the eye can see. Somewhere beyond those forests, according to an ancient legend, lies a kingdom unlike anything the world had ever seen. A kingdom where gold was everywhere. Gold on the walls. Gold in the temples, gold beneath the earth. And somewhere at its heart, a city so wealthy that its rulers were said to possess unimaginable riches. For centuries, explorers searched for it. Spanish conquistadors crossed mountains and deserts. Expeditions disappeared into the Amazon. Men died from hunger, disease, violence, and exhaustion. Maps were redrawn again and again. Every time the explorers believed they were close, the legendary kingdom seemed to move farther away. But here is the mystery. Was El Dorado ever a city at all? Because the original story may have been very different from the legend that Europe eventually created. It may not have been a golden city. It may not even have been a kingdom. It may have started with a single man, a sacred ceremony, and a lake hidden high in the mountains of Colombia. This is the story of El Dorado, the legend that sent generations of explorers into one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not where El Dorado was, but how a real ancient tradition became one of history's most enduring myths. Long before Spanish ships reached the northern coast of South America, the highlands of what is now Colombia were already home to complex societies. Among them were the Muisca. They lived across the high plateaus of the Andes in a landscape of mountains, valleys, lakes, and fertile agricultural land. Their society was organized. They cultivated crops. They traded goods across long distances. They created sophisticated textiles, ceramics, ornaments, and extraordinary works of metal. But perhaps nothing captured the European imagination more than their use of gold. To the Spanish conquistadors, gold meant wealth. It meant power. It meant political influence. And above all, it meant treasure. But to the Muisca, gold had a very different significance. Gold was closely associated with ritual, status, symbolism, and the sacred. It was not simply a currency or a pile of wealth waiting to be discovered. This difference in meaning would become crucial. Because when Europeans began hearing stories about gold and sacred ceremonies, they interpreted those stories through their own worldview. And slowly, something changed. A ceremony became a treasure. A treasure became a kingdom, and eventually, the kingdom became El Dorado. At the center of the legend was a ritual. According to historical accounts and later traditions, a new Muisca ruler was associated with a ceremony on a sacred lake. The ruler would be covered with gold dust. He would then travel onto the water on a ceremonial raft. Offerings were thrown into the lake. Gold, precious objects, sacred gifts. The ceremony was not about building a golden city. It was about religion, power, sacrifice, and the relationship between the ruler, the community, and the supernatural world. But when stories of this ritual reached the Spanish, something remarkable happened. The phrase associated with the golden ruler became transformed. The Spanish interpretation eventually produced the idea of El Dorado, literally associated with the Gilded One. But the story did not remain attached to a person. It began to travel, and as it traveled, it grew. The golden man became a golden ruler. The ruler became the ruler of a wealthy kingdom. The kingdom needed a capital, and eventually, Europe imagined
May this offering bring us peace. We offer this sacrifice to the waters. Let the waters receive our offering.
Into a lost city was not immediate. It happened gradually. The Spanish were entering a continent they barely understood. Their maps were incomplete. Their knowledge of the interior was limited. Every rumor had value. Every story about wealthy people could lead to another expedition. And the conquistadors were operating in a world where information was power. If someone claimed that gold existed beyond a mountain range, explorers followed the rumor. If another traveler said the kingdom was farther east, the maps changed. If a river was said to lead toward a wealthy civilization, another expedition followed it. El Dorado became less of a specific location and more of a moving target. One expedition would search in the Andes. Another would look toward the Amazon, another toward Guyana. The farther they searched, the larger the legend became. The city always seemed to be somewhere else. Just beyond the next mountain, beyond the next river, beyond the next forest, and this was one of the most dangerous features of the legend. There was no location that could ever definitively prove it wrong. If the explorers failed to find El Dorado, perhaps they simply had not gone far enough. By the 16th century, the search for El Dorado had become an obsession. Expeditions were expensive. They required horses, weapons, food, guides, ships, and enormous amounts of labor. Yet the promise of unimaginable wealth made the risk seem worthwhile. Some explorers returned with nothing. Others returned with stories. And stories were enough to send another expedition into the wilderness. Among the most famous journeys was the expedition associated with Gonzalo Pizarro and Francisco de Orellana. They entered some of the harshest environments on the continent. The expedition suffered from hunger and disease. Supplies disappeared. Animals died. Men became exhausted. And eventually, the search brought them into the immense river systems of the Amazon. The expedition had not found El Dorado, but it encountered something else that would become legendary in its own right. The Amazon River. This is one of the strange ironies of the El Dorado story. The search for a mythical kingdom helped it push Europeans deeper into territories that had previously been largely unknown to them. The explorers were searching for gold, but they were also mapping rivers, mountains, forests, and civilizations. The legend was false in one sense, yet it changed the real world. The legend of El Dorado did not remain a Spanish obsession. It crossed the Atlantic. By the late 16th century, English explorers also became fascinated by the possibility of a wealthy kingdom somewhere in South America. But among them was Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh became associated with expeditions toward Guyana. He believed that powerful and wealthy lands might exist in the region. His writings helped spread the idea that an enormous inland kingdom could still be found. The geography was different. The rumors were different. But the dream was the same: gold, power, hidden kingdom waiting to be discovered. The problem was that the deeper the explorers traveled, the more uncertain the evidence became. Rumor contradicted another. Indigenous accounts were filtered through translation. European expectations shaped what explorers believed they were hearing. And every unexplained object, distant mountain, or unfamiliar settlement could become evidence of the kingdom they wanted. El Dorado became larger than its origin. This is perhaps the most fascinating part of the story. Historical event does not have to be completely false to become a myth. Sometimes the most powerful myths begin with a small piece of truth. Then time adds another layer, and another, until the original story is almost impossible to recognize. Perhaps the greatest treasure of El Dorado was never gold. It was the story, a story powerful enough to send men across an entire continent. Powerful enough to change maps. Powerful enough to inspire expeditions into territories where Europeans had never traveled before. And powerful enough to survive for almost 5 centuries. The real Muisca world was not a fantasy. Their culture was real. Their rituals were real. Their gold was real. Lake Guatavita is real. But the enormous golden city described in European imagination remains unproven. And perhaps that is why the legend continues to fascinate us. Because somewhere between history and imagination, there is still a question. What if the explorers misunderstood what they were looking for? What if El Dorado was never a city? What if it was never meant to be found? Maybe the true El Dorado was not a place at all. Maybe it was an idea. The idea that somewhere, beyond the known world, there was a fortune waiting for the person brave enough to find it. And that idea changed history. For centuries, men entered the wilderness searching for gold. Some found rivers. Some found new lands. Some found ancient cultures. Some found nothing. And many never returned. The city remained hidden. Not necessarily because it was buried beneath the jungle, but because perhaps it never existed in the form they imagined. So when we ask, where is El Dorado? Maybe the better question is, who created El Dorado? The answer may be found not in a lost city, but in the meeting between two worlds. A real indigenous tradition, a foreign obsession with gold, and centuries of stories that transformed one into the other. The Golden City may never have existed. But its legend certainly did, and it still does. This is ReHistoryy, where history is not always about finding the answers. Sometimes, it's about discovering the mystery behind the question.